If you have played any games made by Hoyoverse, you must have come across terms like aeons, archons, and gnosis. Well, these terms come from an ancient dead religion called Gnosticism. But I believe the use of these terms aren't random or just for the cool factor, but it might point us to a bigger plan by Hoyoverse. Because I can't help but notice the subtle connections made between Honkai Star Rail and Genshin Impact. Now, it's quite common for anime, manga, and gacha games to use certain religion, spiritual beliefs, or esoteric traditions as inspiration for or to be used directly in their world building, be it power systems or the logic on which the series itself function. In the case of Hoyoverse, they have chosen a particular heretical, there is a reason for that, branch of Christianity called Gnosticism. Now, this is going to be a gross oversimplification of Gnostic beliefs, HSR lore, and Genshin Impact lore. Because if I were to tell you everything about all these three things and deep dive into them, we would be here for hours, if not days. And also because I'm not that well versed in Genshin lore. I haven't touched the game in like years, man. Well, first, what is Gnosticism? Gnosticism is a branch of Christianity that seems to have started around 1 century after the death of Jesus Christ. Not many is known about Gnosticism and the Gnostics, since it was deemed a heretical branch. The early church actively suppressed and destroyed many writings and teachings of the Gnostics. So for most of history, we only knew about Gnosticism based on writings made by those who opposed and critiqued it. Only recently, as in the 40s, did we actually rediscover some of the Gnostics' original writing in the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt. For why it was deemed heretical, we need to take a look at the basics of Gnostic beliefs and their theology. So, before time itself, there was the one God, known by a couple of different names, and he was perfect beyond human comprehension. Since God was too perfect to ever have any reason to do anything, he didn't create anything, not even heaven. From his thoughts alone, out comes these other heavenly beings called aeons. The first of the aeons was called Barbelo. Now, the aeons are all genderless, but they're always been given like feminine or masculine pronouns. And from her union with the one true God, the third aeon was born, that aeon being Christ. You can already see why this might be considered heretical. And from this divine trinity, other aeons start to spawn. Each aeon essentially is an extension or expression of the infinite qualities of the one God. Think about wisdom, justice, things of those nature. However, one of the aeon called Sophia, which is the Greek word for wisdom, wanted to have a child, just like how the one God and Barbelo had Christ. But she went about it in the wrong way, by conceiving the child independently without involving her male partner or the approval of the father. And because of this independent conception, the child came out misshapen and deformed. That child is known as the Demiurge, or its other name, Yaldabaoth. Due to the shame of what she has done, Sophia locked away the Demiurge in the void. Now, Yaldabaoth, having no clue what has just happened and having a vague memory of heaven, then decides to create our material world. And alongside it, his own versions of the aeons, called archons, that help him rule over our world. Essentially, what he's doing is mimicking the one true God and heaven. What the Gnostics are basically trying to say here is that the God of the Bible is an evil God, because he created this material world with a lot of imperfections, things like mortality and evil, and the fact that the material world is temporary and will end one day. He is also a jealous, genocidal, and angry God, who is envious of humanity and gets pissed off at them if humanity doesn't do what he wants. Jesus then is sent by the one true God to free humanity, and make them realize that they too are capable of divinity, by achieving or attaining a state called Gnosis. Now, if you've played any of the games made by Hoyoverse, some of the words that I said might sound familiar to you. That's because those words come from this religion. And also because it's basically the plot of Honkai Star Rail. Even though there are huge differences in the portrayal and usage of these Gnostic characters and themes, the game characters that these terms are applied to do stick quite close to their source, at least on principle. Now, the game that really ran with this Gnostic inspiration and Gnostic terminology would be Honkai Star Rail, where the main driving force of the story and lore are the Aeons. The Aeons here are also godlike beings that represent or embody a specific concept or attribute that are referred to as paths. They differ, however, in the way they function and their origin. Unlike the Gnostic Aeon, the HSR Aeons are not quite immortal, as in they can die. Aeons can kill each other, or sometimes they can be absorbed by other Aeons if their paths are too similar. In the case of Enna, the Order being absorbed by Shipe, the Harmony. Another difference is that the HSR Aeons aren't emanations of another higher being, but rather they are the ultimate embodiment of a path or concept. Also, something that I noticed is that there seems to be different kinds or types of Aeons in Honkai Star Rail. See, most Aeons that we know of in HSR was at one point regular mortals or regular biological being, except for Noose, that then ascended to godhood after going through some life-altering event that caused them to embody a particular concept to its maximum. Most relevant example right now would be Aha, the Aeon of Elation, who supposedly ascended after realizing how meaningless the universe is, and then proceeds to laugh his ass off after watching a baby falling down from the sky, or something. But then there are also Aeons who are so old, Aeons like Cliffoth and Ho, that everybody assumed that they were there since the beginning of time. Question is, who or what did they ascend from if they were always here? Which, to me at least, seems to indicate or imply that they could function differently. One minor difference that I kind of like to point out is that, again, while the Aeons in Gnosticism are genderless, they're always described with feminine or masculine pronouns, or feminine or masculine qualities. While in HSR, the Aeons are still genderless, but they are referred to with a more gender-neutral pronouns. They, their, them. But I think the most interesting use of this Gnostic inspiration by Hoyo in Star Rail is with the entire Amphorius storyline. Because the entire Amphorius storyline is pretty much an almost beat-by-beat recreation of the Gnostic creation story. For one, it involves the use of another Gnostic term, being the Demiurge. In the Amphorius story itself, we get two separate interpretations of the Demiurge term. The first obvious one would be Kerene. Also, I'm using the Greek pronunciation of her name, which is also the pronunciation used in the JP dub.
Kirini. Kirini.
I am not using your American pronunciation called Cyrene or Cyrene. I'm not doing none of that, bro. Okay? And if you think it's pretentious, fuck it, we ball. But Kerene follows a more classical, philosophical use of the term demiurge. As described by Plato, a demiurge is an artisan-like figure responsible for fashioning and maintaining the physical universe. The other interpretation is the character Lygus, or Xandar, who follows the Gnostic use of the word. That usually refers to Yaldabaoth. The story of Amphorius follows the creation story of Gnosticism with a couple twists. For one, Xandar created Nous, an AI who would then somehow ascend to become an Aeon of erudition. In his anger and jealousy towards Nous, this AI that he created ascending to become an Aeon and limiting human knowledge, he hijacked a supercomputer running a simulated world. Now, this simulated world was running some sort of equation related to the erudition, so he hijacked it and changed the variable of the simulation to destruction to create a being strong enough to kill Nous. It's a similar premise to Gnosticism with a couple twists. The twist here being that the Aeon is a man-made creation, while the Demiurge is the creator of the Aeon, who is... You know what I mean? Like, the twist is right there. But you also have a second Demiurge in the story, being Cyrene, Kerene, Cyrene, whatever the fuck, who tries to reshape Amphorius or the world. Or, actually, she's been doing a lot of stuff in the story. She's trying to make Amphorius a real place, or she's trying to preserve the memories of Amphorius, so it could then become a real place. She does a lot. Nous here would be an insert for the one true God in Gnosticism, because the scepter or the supercomputer is based on his brain. Xandar and Kerene would be the insert for the demiurge, so there's two of them. They essentially play the same role, however they take very different paths, which would make the Trailblazer, or us the player, Jesus Christ. Although one could argue that Kerene could also fit here, because they were both trying to save Amphorius and the people inside of it. But yeah, basically the entire Amphorius storyline is a recreation of the Gnostic creation story. But instead of the material world, we're talking about a computer simulation, a simulated world. Basically the TLDR, or like the oversimplified version of this, is that the creation of Amphorius very much mirrors the creation of our world, our physical material world. And also the conflict between the Demiurge and the conflict between the Aeons are also perfectly mirrored in Star Rail. Which then brings us to the first game Hoyo made with Gnostic elements. A game that came out before Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact. Now, although I haven't touched Genshin in a couple of years, I do still kinda maybe not really keep up with its lore. And it sounds a little tinfoil hat-ish and a bit crackpot-ish, but I do believe that these games are connected. For one, the first Gnostic term we encountered were put on the most important set of characters, the Archons, who in Genshin are the gods/rulers and overseers of Teyvat. There are 7 of them. There used to be more, but then they had a war and, they killed each other and so on and so forth. Now, the Archons in Gnostic traditions are essentially angels or Yaldabaoth. They do have different names, though, than their Christian counterparts, so they're not called Gabriel or Michael. But the Archons in Genshin all have names of demons from the Ars Goetia, a book that contains the names, supposedly, of demons subjugated by King Solomon or the Prophet Sulaiman. Which is interesting. Don't know if that is supposed to be some sort of clue or anything, considering the Archons in Gnosticism are angels for an evil god, basically. And the other thing is, the Archons in Genshin are also the ones who possesses a Gnosis within them, not humanity. Although the Gnosis here is an actual thing, like an object, not inner enlightenment. I then propose a theory that Teyvat is actually another scepter or simulated world, much like Amphorius. Now, the evidence is strong, but they are a little disjointed. Firstly, when Hoyo uses any of these Gnostic terms, they again tend to stick close to the source on principle. An example would be the Aeons, as we've already established before. The important parts of these terms are still intact. So, the whole thing about the Archons in Gnostic text is that they are creations of Yaldabaoth to help him rule over the world, because he wanted to mimic how the one true God had his Aeons. And if Hoyo is still sticking close to the source material, perhaps the Archons are a creation of a demiurge, we don't know who. It could be Lygus, it could be Kerene, who knows. Secondly, we do know that there are multiple scepters made in the Star Rail lore. The scepters themselves were made by Rupert II, based on the brain of Nous. So it would not be too far out to say that there are other scepters, much like Amphorius, because every single character didn't even know that Amphorius was a scepter. When the scepters were made, they were spread out across the cosmos and nobody knows their location. Safe to assume that there might be others like it. The other one is the visual presentation of Teyvat. Now, I know that visuals aren't always a good way to judge things, because, it could just be an artistic choice. But there are reasons here for me to at least say that there's substance to it, right? Because Genshin have this, visual contrast that doesn't make sense sometimes. Prime example would be, anytime that there is a world-breaking or reality-bending event, it's portrayed with these blocks or pixels-looking things. Like the fight with Dottore, for example, where he splits the sky open, but the sky gets split with these pixels or blocks around the cut, which could seem like a creative choice at first, but then you also have other things like Mavuika's bike, or just a robot somehow. And then there's also this thing, which looks a whole lot like this thing. And as I was writing the script for this video, Genshin had a new story chapter that introduced a place that's called Hell, which looks awfully familiar. It looks very, 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 very close to the back-end / server of Amphorius, while also being flooded in this black tide looking thing. I mean, okay, it could be a reference, it could be not, but it's just too close to not raise any questions. Because here's the thing, when we first got to Amphorius, we did not know the twist was going to be it was a computer simulation the entire time. But something I did notice on my first playthrough is with these few oddities with Amphorius. Like for example, you could collect these emojis around the map. Why are there random floating emojis you could collect? And then you also could collect these golden bugs. And then, something that I noticed was that the Black Tide looked very Genshin-like. It looks like something that would have come out of Genshin, which felt a little out of place for a map based off ancient Greece. It wasn't until the twist about Amphorius was revealed that clues like this started making sense. Like, oh, yeah, of course it's gonna be floating emojis around, it's a simulation. Oh, we're collecting golden bugs? Yeah, that's meant to be a pun, because we're collecting bugs in a simulation, see? The irony or twist here being, this place that we thought ran on Aeon magic was in fact a piece of technology. It was a supercomputer that was also running on Aeon space magic. We didn't know that this wasn't even a planet. The people aren't even real, they're all NPCs. So yeah, what I said about Genshin having this visual contrast might still ring true, because while yes, the world of Teyvat seems very, I wouldn't call it ancient, but it definitely has a very medieval feel to it. It is littered with these visuals that seems to suggest advanced technology, pixels, these cube-looking things, and just a lot of things seem to be very technological, which is again a stark contrast to the very medieval-feeling world that is Teyvat. I guess the last thing I got for my theory is Hoyo has previously expressed interest in making a connected universe for all their games, MCU style. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say that they are in fact building this connected multimedia universe. Because here's the thing, Honkai Impact and HSR has already been heavily implied, basically confirmed, to have existed in the same universe. Before this, people assumed that both games exist in the same multiverse but separate timelines, Spider-Verse style. But now there's a lot of evidence to point towards it not being the case, because it seems like they actually exist in the same universe. Honkai Impact happens on Earth, while Honkai Star Rail happens in, the wider universe. And knowing this, I do feel like them using the same mythology or theology for HSR and Genshin feels like an intentional choice. Because Honkai Impact and Zenless Zone Zero don't use any Gnostic terms. And even if they do, not to the same level of importance as Star Rail and Genshin. Both of them basically have these Gnostic terms and characters basically being the center of both the plot and the lore. And the elements that are being used in either of these two games are also supposed to connect to one another. Again, the Archons are a creation of the Demiurge, and if Hoyo is sticking close to the source material, then this could be the conduit for that shared universe plan. You smelling what I'm shedding, gang? As a side note, I know that these games are already connected with the multiverse via the imaginary tree. What I am suggesting, however, is that Genshin is connected to Honkai Star Rail in the same way Honkai Impact is connected to Honkai Star Rail, which is they exist in the same universe in different capacities. Honkai Impact existing on Earth while Honkai Star Rail is happening across the universe, and what I'm suggesting is that Genshin Impact exists as a scepter, as a simulation, which doesn't subtract the fact that they're all still connected to the imaginary tree. It's just that they're connected, but in the same branch, basically. Now, the one counter to my theory is that Genshin Impact nonchalantly confirmed that space travel is a thing, in which Alice, Klee's mom, confirmed that the reason we haven't seen Klee's dad is because he's been traveling to other planets. So you mean to tell me one of the most important characters in the game just casually confirms that her husband is capable of space travel? And oh yeah, the Traveler, both of them, yeah, they arrived at Teyvat via a spaceship because they crash landed on the moon. Like what? So that could mean that Teyvat itself is not a simulation. Unless the Scepter of Teyvat is not just simulating a planet, but instead a simulated universe. One more thing. If my theory is proven to be true, that means the Traveler, both of them, or at least one of them, could also technically be considered an insert for Jesus Christ again, much like the Trailblazer. Anyways, I would love to know what you guys think. Did I miss or did I hit with this vid? And maybe you have your own evidence for this theory or to counter this theory, who knows? Tell me in the comments. Peace out.